Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week, following the sad death of Neil Peart, we're going to look at the top 10 albums made by his band Rush. Rush, of course, one of the greatest prog rock bands of all time. They formed in Toronto in Canada in 1968 when bass player Geddy Lee got together with his school chum Alex Lifeson, a guitar player, and drummer John Rutsey. They played the bar and school circuit for a few years before securing a deal in 1974. John Rutsey left after the first album was replaced by Neil Peart, and the rest is prog rock history. The band went on to make 19 studio albums. We're going to look at the top 10 of those. Now, it goes without saying that the playing on all of these records is absolutely stellar. So I don't need to keep repeating myself. You just bear that in mind every time we talk about one of these records. But let's crack into it. At number 10 from 1986, their 11th album, Power Windows. Now, as we will hear, Rush had been making more and more concessions to 80s music. They had introduced synths and they were introducing sampling, and by this time they got to this record, they were using drum machines and sequencers and all sorts of things. There are a couple of good songs on here. Big Money, The Manhattan Project, both were singles, and the album did fairly well. It did over 1 million copies. But for me, this is kind of the last decent album before a rot set in, and Rush seemed to lose something. I don't think it's by any stretch a great album, and it's not to every Rush fan's taste, but it's unquestionably where Rush were in the 80s. At number 9, Grace Under Pressure, their 10th album from 1984. This was the album that just preceded the one we were talking about. They'd been working with Terry Brown, their producer, for nearly a decade, but they were clearly on a new path now, looking for new sounds. So they replaced him with Peter Henderson. Steve Lillywhite and Trevor Horn had also been considered, and the result is this is a new wave sounding record. It is taking what Rush were doing in a direction they were moving and just pushing it further and further and further. There's not a great deal of texture on this record. There are no acoustic guitars. The sound is very sort of it's quite sort of cold and lifeless. Now, I think that's what gives it an atmosphere of its own. Distant Early Warning, I think, is one of the really great post-70s Rush songs. A lot of the songs here were inspired by newspaper articles that Neil Peart was reading at the time. It's a bit of a Marmite record, this one. Some Rush fans love it, some don't like it so much, but I think it's, for me, I think it's their last really, really good record. At number 8 from 1974, their debut, Rush. Now, this, of course, had John Rutsey on drums. Now, this is a really typical first band's album of the time. It's really very inspired by Led Zeppelin and Cream. The guitar sound is fat and rudimentary, and it's a hard rock album with some bluesy elements. It's very riff heavy. Now, the thing that sets it apart really is that voice, Geddy Lee's voice, that high, unique voice. Now, some people love it, some people don't like it so much. I really like it. I do think in some ways a lot of Rush lyrics are kind of irrelevant. Because when you listen to Rush carefully, you get hooked on the arrangements and the musicianship more than anything, I think. And the voice is just like another instrument providing a counterpoint to that. On this album, you've got Working Man, you've got Finding My Way, and you've got In the Mood. It's a really solid debut album by, a band who can clearly play, but probably yet to find their voice a little bit. John Rutsey had diabetes and couldn't do long tours, so it was mutually and amicably agreed that he should leave the band, and he was replaced by Neil Peart. At number 7 from 1975, their second album, Fly By Night. So Neil Peart coming into the band was really, really important for a number of reasons. Not one being he was a lyricist, and being a lyricist, he gave Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson more time to work on the arrangements. So the arrangements automatically became more complex and more intricate. So you can see we're moving towards that prog rock style they developed. Fly By Night is a great song on here. It's something of a Canadian classic, but you can really hear that prog element on something like Bytor and the Snow Dog, which has lots of different suites, different movements it goes through. Ultimate Classic Rock put this in their 100 greatest rock albums of the 70s, and said that Neil Peart was the spark that pushed them to greatness, and I think that's absolutely right. I think that's spot on. Number 6, their ninth album from 1982, Signals. Now, this was the follow-up to Moving Pictures, which had been a big success. And this album takes that album's use of synths and sequences even further. As we've already talked about, we're into the 80s now with Rush, so there's a lot of synth work going on. So this is a very synth-heavy record, interesting lyrically, particularly, because it explores how technology will isolate and overtake us all. The irony there, of course. Subdivisions, Analog Kid, Digital Man, New World Man. It's not hard to see where Neil Peart was with his lyrics. The band's stock was very high at this point. So this was a top 10 album in Canada, USA and UK. I mean, it is full of synth-heavy riffs. But I think it works. But I do also think it's the start of sort of a minor sort of riff developing. Alex Lifeson getting a little bit edged out. The guitar sort of being edged out by synths quite a lot. And this is certainly one of their most 80s sounding records. Now, at number 5, and here's where the controversy starts. Their fourth album from 1976, 2112. Now, this is one of the classic Rush albums, and one of their albums most Rush fans will put at the very, very top of their list. It's not my favourite Rush album, but I do love it. I absolutely love it. I think from here on in, these next 5 albums are absolutely the essence of Rush at their peak. This is regarded very much as the album that saved Rush. The preceding albums, this Caress of Steel, hadn't done very well at all. And it's not an easy album to love. It had been a failure, it made no money, and their record label Mercury were about to drop them. Their audience was declining, and they actually had taken a bit of a critical mauling. So the band at this point is confused and disheartened, and Geddy Lee has admitted they almost broke up. The crucial turning point was when they promoted their engineer Terry Brown to producer. Now, Terry Brown taking over, he was a good friend of the band, he was working with them, and he encouraged them to find their own voice and let Rush sound like Rush. So I think on this album, more than any, they really started finding their identity. Before, people were still accusing them of nicking from Led Zeppelin and all that sort of thing. But here, particularly on side 1, 2112, you can hear, it's another of those tracks with loads of different sort of segments where the band are just, they're dazzling musicianship moving between the sections. Particularly Temple of Syrinx, which was actually released as a single from 2112, the bigger piece overall. So all the Rush tropes are here: the time signatures, the voice, the guitars, the bass. This is the album where it all really starts coming together. The second side is more of a traditional hard rock sound, but this album went top 5 in Canada and sold over 3 million copies worldwide. So it really is known as the album that saved Rush. At number 4, their 6th album from 1978, Hemispheres. Now, after the success of a track they'd released called Closer to the Heart, you can hear on this album the band beginning to develop an ear for singles. You've got The Trees on here and Circumstance, which are both sort of shorter, slightly more melodic tracks than the band have done before. So there's a touch more melody all the way through this record. The Trees particularly is nuts. It's a great song about how maples and oaks battle each other for light in the forest. Cygnus 11 occupies all of side 1. So this is only a 4-track record, and with a lot of other bands that can, a whole track occupying one side can get a bit boring. The thing is, Rush are so imaginative. They're so full of great riffs and ideas, any one of which could have led to a song of its own. That you don't get bored listening to a long Rush song or a long Rush suite. It's just what they do. I mean, listen to the last track on this album, La Villa Strangiato. It's absolutely fabulous, full of great moments. So number 3, from 1977, their 5th album, Farewell to Kings. This was an important record. It was very much their breakthrough record, really. This was the album that has Closer to the Heart on it, which was a hit single. And Closer to the Heart is one of my absolute favourite Rush songs. It's like the greatest Christmas song you've never heard. Not that it's anything to do with Christmas, but it has bells on it and chiming acoustic guitars and a lovely heartfelt sentiment. This is 1977, and other bands are making concessions to punk all over the place. Not Rush, no way. There's absolutely no concession to punk music whatsoever. They're just going to do what they want to do. The band had been on a 16th-month tour with 2112, and they didn't take a break. They went straight into the studio with this, and as a result, the playing is absolutely fantastic. But more importantly than this, the sound has opened up. I think the band have decided to they're using more percussion. Neil Peart's opening up the sound with percussion. There's pedal synths on here. So the whole sound has kind of expanded, and Geddy Lee himself has said that this is the Rush album where they've developed the most and he learnt the most. Interesting enough, this album was recorded in Rockfield in Wales, which is also known as the home of Bohemian Rhapsody. Number 2 from 1980, their 7th album, Permanent Waves. Now, I see Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures as kind of a brother and sister album. And very much indicative of that new Rush era that they were pushing towards the end of the 70s and then went full on in the 80s. This is a radio friendly, it's less intricate record. You've got Free Will, Spirit of Radio, Entre Nous, great, almost pop rock songs. The sound is much crisper here. There's still a prog rock element. Natural Science ends the album, which is about 7 or 8 minutes long. But the band, again, they'd finished a long tour, and this time they did take a break, and I think maybe they've been progged out. But they came back with new ideas and clearly wanting to forge a new sound. So, you have really now got the synths and the melodies are in, and they're in to stay. But that takes us to my number 1 Rush album, and most of you will not be surprised to know that it is their 8th album from 1981, Moving Pictures, and this takes all the success of Permanent Waves and then goes one louder. The arrangements are even tighter, the songs are even shorter, they're even more radio friendly. For me, this album is really one of the perfect amalgams of prog rock and pop. It's probably the greatest prog rock pop album that there's ever been. Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, Limelight, Vital Signs. I mean, these were all released as singles in various countries. 4 songs from a Rush album. Who'd have ever thought that when they were making Caress of Steel? You've also got YYZ, which was Grammy nominated as Best Rock Instrumental. So they've still got, they're still not losing complete sight of their prog roots. I think this is absolutely one of the best, if not the best, example of a rock band crossing over into synthland. Not many bands did it so well, they did it so seamlessly. So this really was now a new era for Rush, which they took further and further with that sound on later albums, which I think with less success. The playing, of course, is razor sharp, and this became, unsurprisingly, their best-selling album. The band famously said that even girls started turning up to their concerts after this album. So it's no wonder they wanted to put more and more synths on following records. So that is my rundown of the top 10 Rush albums. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. You're thinking, where's Roll the Bones, Clockwork Angels, Vapor Trails, Presto, Snakes and Arrows, all of those records? Well, look, I've listened to all of those records, and I have to be honest, they leave me a little bit cold. I really don't think there's anything I've heard on them that would trouble this top 10. As I've said before, I think my 10 has really got the essence of Rush, particularly the top 5 songs. The top 5 albums that I've put here. But you may disagree. In fact, I'm sure you do. And if you think that any of those later albums are worth me reinvestigating, then please say so, and I will go and do it. But I have really enjoyed catching up with Rush again over the last couple of weeks. They were a special band. The musicianship was out of this world, and Neil Peart was really in a class of his own, it has to be said. And he's left a heck of a legacy. So thank you very much, Neil, and thank you, Rush. And I will see you again very soon for another top 10, another rock records reviewed. Thanks. Bye-bye.